Hello, everyone. My name is Cheryl Wiggins, and this is my presentation that will cover the topics of conflict, delegation, and work environment. Thank you and enjoy. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a conflict scenario that I've actually experienced and I think is pretty common in the healthcare setting. So the scenario is that a nurse is coming in for her 3 night shifts. And she happens to be following the same exact day shift nurse for those 3 days. So each night that this night shift nurse comes in, she's left with all kinds of outstanding tasks, from doing CTs, MRIs, labs to be drawn, important phone calls to make, what have you. There's just tasks left over from day shift that aren't done. So on each of these 3 nights, the night shift nurse feels immediately overwhelmed when she gets to work because she has to deal with these tasks before she moves on to anything else. However, the day shift nurse has also been incredibly busy. In the ICU, we normally have 2 patients. She's had 3 patients, so she feels very, very busy. And she feels bad that she couldn't get to these tasks, but she feels justified leaving them because nursing is a team sport and you can only do so much in 12 hours. Okay, so that's our scenario, and the conflict is definitely brewing because this night shift nurse is nearing her tolerance peak with this situation, and the conflict is about to escalate. So next, we're going to talk about conflict resolution strategies. So first and foremost, the goal of conflict resolution is to create a win-win solution for all the parties involved. So the first conflict resolution strategy is compromising, where both parties give up something that they wanted. And this usually results in a win-win feeling, especially when both parties perceive that they gave up something less or that they have won more than the other party. The next resolution strategy is competing. And competing is when one party pursues exactly what that party wants at the expense of others. And this results in a win-lose situation and often leaves the loser feeling angry and frustrated. The next conflict resolution strategy is cooperating or accommodating. And this is the exact opposite of competing. One party sacrifices his or her beliefs and allows the other party to win. And in this case, the actual problem is not actually solved. This is a win-lose situation, and the person that is cooperating or accommodating often expects some type of payback from the winning party in the future. And in this situation, typically resentment will develop. The next resolution strategy is smoothing. And this is when one party in a conflict attempts to soothe or pacify the other party, and they focus on agreements rather than differences. And emotional components of the conflict are minimized. And this is usually appropriate for minor disagreements, but rarely results in resolution of the actual conflict. The next resolution strategy is avoiding, where both parties choose to ignore the conflict completely. They are both aware that there is a conflict, and they choose not to acknowledge or attempt to resolve it. The source of the conflict tends to reemerge later in a more exaggerated fashion. And then the last conflict resolution strategy is collaborating, and this is a win-win solution. And this is where all parties choose to set aside their original goals and they work together to establish a common goal. Problem solving in this scenario is a joint effort with mutual respect. They have open and honest communication and shared decision-making powers. So then back to the scenario that I described in the previous slide. Unfortunately, in that scenario, I used the avoiding strategy because I decided that the cost of confronting the day shift nurse was, the cost exceeded the benefit in that case, and I didn't really want to make waves at work. However, I will say that the resentment is kind of there, and every night when I go in for my night shift, I do hope that I do not follow this nurse because I don't want to deal with that situation again. So next we're going to talk about what you should do before, during, and after a negotiation. So first, what is a negotiation? A negotiation is when both parties are giving up something and the emphasis is on accommodating differences between the two parties. So before a negotiation, you want to be prepared and you want to have done your homework in order to be prepared. You want to determine the incentives of the person you will be negotiating with, determine your starting point, your trade-offs, and your bottom line, and you want to look for hidden agendas on both sides. So during the negotiation, you want to maintain your composure. You want to ask for what you want assertively. You want to be a good role model. You want to have good communication skills, assertiveness, and flexibility. You want to be patient and take breaks if either of the parties get frustrated or tired. And you want to avoid destructive negotiation techniques. However, if these destructive negotiation techniques are used, you want to be able to counter them. So then after the negotiation, you want to restate what has been agreed on, and this is done both verbally and in writing, and then recognize and thank all the participants for contributing to a successful negotiation. So next, we're going to talk about some destructive techniques in negotiation. So sometimes, unfortunately, negotiators will use intimidating or manipulative tactics. So 3 of these destructive tactics are ridicule, flattery, and sadness. So number 1, ridicule. The goal is to intimidate other people that are involved in the negotiation. So if someone uses this tactic, just try to keep a relaxed body posture, keep a steady gaze and a patient smile, and try not to take it personally. The second destructive technique is flattery, and flattery just makes collaboration really difficult because the person who's been flattered may be less willing to disagree with the other party in the negotiation. So basically, the attention and the focus is diverted away from the negotiation. The third destructive technique is sadness. And sadness is when one party is perceived as sad or has lower power in the negotiation. This sad party is likely to be involved in future collaborative efforts. So the other party tends to concede more due to feelings of empathy and compassion for the sad party. So again, back to the scenario that I talked about in the first slide. No, I didn't use any of these destructive tactics in my negotiation. Okay, so now we're going to move on to delegation, and I'm going to start by giving you a scenario in which I delegated tasks to another person. So first of all, what is delegation? So delegation is accomplishing tasks and completing work through transfer of authority to another person. Perform a task while the original person remains accountable for that task. So my situation happened to me, or my scenario happened to me 2 or 3 weeks ago, again in the ICU. I had 2 patients, both of which were critically ill and were decompensating simultaneously. So one ended up having a spontaneous GI bleed with a critical hemoglobin who needed blood emergently, while my other patient was bradying down and was about to go into cardiac arrest. So there was another nurse that was coming up, looked like he was willing to help me. He agreed to help me. So I ended up delegating the task of going to blood bank to acquire blood and initiating the emergent blood transfusion on my other patient while I was attending to my other patient who was crashing with the intensivist. Next, we're going to talk about the 5 rights of delegation. So there are 5 rights that can help guide appropriate delegation. So first, we'll start with the right task. So the right task is referring to the actual task or action that is being delegated. So ensure that the task is appropriate and right for the patient. So taking it back to the scenario I just talked about, this patient needed a blood transfusion per the physician order. So this was the right task to be delegated. The next right is the right circumstance. So you need to make sure it's the appropriate patient setting, available resources, and other relevant factors considered. So in this scenario, this was definitely the right setting for a blood transfusion, and the task was able to be delegated due to the time-sensitive nature of the task, and the resources would be consent, IV access were all readily available, already signed and ready, and this was absolutely the right circumstance to delegate help. So the next right of delegation is the right person. So in this case, you want to make sure that the right person is delegating the task to the right person to be performed on the right person. So in this scenario, you want to make sure that all people involved are the right person. So for this scenario, I was the primary nurse of the GI bleed patient, so I was the right person to delegate the task. And then the RN that I delegated the task to was also the right person because this was perfectly within his scope of practice to transfuse blood. And then the patient was also the right person to receive the blood transfusion. So in this scenario, all elements of this right of delegation were met. The 4th right of delegation is right direction or communication. So for this, right, you want to have clear and concise descriptions of the tasks. That includes the objectives, the limits, and the expectations of the task. So in this scenario, I clearly communicated where the consent was, how many units of blood were needed to start it immediately, and what the objective of the task was. So the last right of delegation is the right level of supervision, which is appropriate monitoring, evaluation, intervention, and feedback as needed. So in the scenario, during the coding of my other patient, I would ask how the transfusion was going with my GI patient. And then after everything kind of calmed down and everything was settled, I double checked all the blood product charting and finished up the transfusion, and I thanked my coworker for his help. Next, we're going to talk about strategies for successful delegation. So basically, there are several strategies you can use to make sure your delegation is successful. So first, you want to start with identifying necessary skills and education levels that are needed to complete the delegated task. So in the scenario that I've talked about, I knew the other registered nurse was, I knew he was a registered nurse, and I knew that transfusing blood was perfectly within his scope of practice. So the next strategy is planning ahead. This involves attempting to delegate tasks before you become overwhelmed. I will say in my scenario that wasn't really possible because I was organized and things were going smoothly until both of my patients became unstable very, very quickly. Another strategy is selecting and empowering capable personnel. This involves identifying which coworkers are capable of performing a task. So in my scenario, again, I knew this man was a registered nurse, and I knew he was capable of obtaining blood and initiating blood transfusions because I had seen him do it many, many times before. Another strategy is communication. You need to communicate your goals clearly, and you need to be able to communicate what is being delegated, the purpose of the task, and the expectation of the delegation. Another strategy is setting a deadline and monitoring progress. This involves both parties basically keeping tabs on the task and taking accountability for its completion. Another strategy is monitoring the role and providing guidance. So this involves the person who's delegating the task to basically act as a resource for the person who has been given the task. So being available as a role model and being willing to answer any questions and provide guidance is necessary for the successful completion of this task. Another strategy is to evaluate performance. So after the task is completed, it is necessary to reflect on the positive and negative aspects of how the person completed the task. And then the last strategy is to reward accomplishment. This is making sure that you reward successfully completed tasks. So in my scenario, when all was said and done, I thanked him so much for helping me out. I wrote him a pride card, and I made sure our directors and nurse managers knew how much he had helped me that day. So now we're going to talk about some delegation errors. There are three. There is underdelegation, overdelegation, and improper delegation. So starting with underdelegation, this usually occurs when a person has this false assumption that delegating might be interpreted by coworkers as a lack of ability to perform a task, or maybe that person doesn't trust their coworkers to perform a task for them for which they're still accountable, or maybe there's just not time to delegate. But underdelegation didn't occur in my scenario. I could have started the blood transfusion, but my attention was needed elsewhere. However, I have experienced underdelegation or seen it at work before. We had a new nurse for a while who wanted to prove that she could handle her assignments, or she just wanted to prove that she was a good coworker. But either way, she was drowning in tasks and she wouldn't ask for help. She wouldn't delegate. But eventually, after a few weeks, she came to the conclusion that delegating and asking for help really isn't a sign of incompetence, and that we all work as a team, and sometimes delegation is definitely necessary. So the next delegation error is overdelegation, and this involves when too much delegation is happening. Coworkers can feel overwhelmed and overburdened by the amount of tasks they have to do now. And this didn't apply to my situation either. I haven't experienced this either. Most people can tell if you are busy and will not delegate more tasks to you if you are super busy. So causes of overdelegation typically are that some people are just poor managers of their time, or possibly that the person doesn't feel competent in their own abilities to perform tasks, so they choose to delegate them to other people. So the last delegation error is improper delegation. So this would be delegating tasks at the wrong time or to the wrong person or for the wrong reason. So this also didn't apply to my scenario. I haven't experienced this either, but typically not following the 5 rights of delegation as discussed before would be the major cause of improper delegation. Okay, so now we're moving on to a healthy work environment. So a healthy work environment is one where all leaders, managers, and healthcare workers work together to provide healthcare on a patient-centered team, and they provide a sense of safety, respect, and empowerment to and for all persons. So nurses need to feel encouraged at work, and they need to feel involved in optimal patient outcomes, and they need to feel like they have an opportunity for growth and professional fulfillment. So there are 6 components or standards of a healthy work environment. So the first is skilled communication. So nurses must be proficient in their communication skills, and they must have clear and concise communication. Number 2 would be true collaboration. So nurses must pursue and they need to foster true collaboration with each other and with other healthcare personnel. Number 3 would be effective decision making. Nurses must be, or they must feel and be valued and committed partners in making policy, in directing and evaluating clinical care, and leading organizational operations. Number 4 would be appropriate staffing. So there needs to be enough staff to ensure a safe working environment and to have an effective match between patient needs and nurse competencies. Number 5 would be meaningful recognition. So meaningful recognition, nurses need to recognize others and be recognized for the value that each of them brings to the work of the organization. So number 6 would be authentic leadership. So nurse leaders must fully embrace the importance of a healthy work environment. They need to live it, and they need to engage others in achieving it and sustaining a healthy work environment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about my current work environment. So I currently work in an ICU at a local hospital, and so we'll go through the 6 standards of a healthy work environment. So communication, I think our unit has great communication. I think that we have to. Between nurses, with intensivists, consulting physicians, family members, we have to have great communication skills, and I think most of us do. As far as collaboration, we, especially on night shift, all the night shift nurses work really well together. When a new patient arrives on the unit or when a patient starts to decompensate, suddenly it's not just you in the room, it's pretty much the entire unit comes to your rescue and comes to help in whatever way they can. So decision making, I think that we play a big part on my unit in decision making. Every shift we round with our intensivists and with our consulting physicians, and collaboratively we kind of decide how the plan of care is going to go or what needs to be done, if any changes need to be made to the plan of care. So all of those are great things. So the 4th standard is appropriate staffing. So I think our ICU, just like most other healthcare workplaces right now, are kind of suffering with not having enough nurses. So we definitely have a shortage right now, and we are working a lot of overtime, and sometimes we have to have 3 patients instead of 2, which kind of puts a strain on you and makes you feel like you didn't give your all to the patients that you did have. So that's one area of my work environment that needs to be rectified, that is in the process of being rectified. But as far as meaningful recognition, we definitely have that on my unit. Nurses recognize other nurses. Our intensivists will recognize us when we've done something well. We have pride cards. Our charge nurses let us know if somebody said something great about us. Yeah, so we definitely have meaningful recognition, and then authentic leadership. We do have great charge nurses, nurse managers, and directors that are very, very professional. They serve as great resources and they're constantly striving to make our unit better than the previous day. So overall, yes, I think my unit is a healthy work environment right now. Like I said, the staffing needs to be worked on a little bit, but they're in the process of hiring more nurses and training more nurses. So I think that we're going to have an even better work environment here shortly. Okay, so